kill a little time for those that are watching on the web while we get hooked up with the equipment here. You did not mention in the introduction something that I wonder if it would get me positioned on the box of Wheaties that I've made 95 consecutive free throws. Would that count? That's still on.
The last time.
No, I made 16 in a row this morning, and I just went home. Glad to be here. Thanks for the privilege of being here. And it isn't about me, so let's get to what it is about. Practicing affirmation, God-centered praise of those who are not God. I'm trying to elaborate what this subtitle means. God-centered praise of those who are not God. Those of you who are astute listeners and have your theological bearings probably have little beeps going off in your antenna right now about praising anything that's not God. Because we make our boast in God alone. Right? All praise, all glory is due to God. He gives to all life, breath, everything else, so that in all things he would get the glory. So what is this about praising somebody who's not God? I'll try to clarify as we go forward in this. So, practicing affirmation is not about self-esteem, which is what people sometimes we find out about this in strike up casual conversations. Oh, it's about self-esteem. It is decidedly not about self-esteem. It's not about self-esteem. I argue, maintain that our culture has a plague of self-esteem right now. Our jails are full of people who esteem themselves. That's all they esteem. They don't esteem their victims. They don't esteem the people, the wardens, those running the jail, their family members, or the taxpayers who are covering it. They esteem only themselves. And unless we click our tongues at them, we're all born that way. You go to the hospital nursery, no baby is crying, wah, 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 feed him. Wah, 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 she's wet. It's all me, 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 me. That's our wiring. From the time we start breathing air, and it's just exemplified by people who take this doctrine seriously. Talking with Don a few minutes ago, and he reminded me of something I wasn't going to say, but I'll say it now. We have a front page Twin Cities character named Adrian Peterson these days, who has been much in the news. And a couple of years ago, he was on the evening news because he had done a lyceum, a school program, one of the local high schools here in the Twin Cities, where he told them, you can, and he was, I don't know if it was the MVP that year or he broke the rushing record or something. He'd done something phenomenal in football. And he said, you can do anything you want to do. And the moment he said that, I said, tell them the truth. Adrian, where's your Super Bowl ring, Adrian? Don't you want one? Of course he wants one. You can't have everything you want. And it was the same year that our president made a similar speech nationwide to high schools all over the country. He said, look at me, I've become president. You can become anything you want to become. I just want to say, okay, Mr. President, with all due respect, give that speech to all the competitors you just beat for the office. Can they all be president? No, they cannot. And the self-esteem movement builds into people, especially young people, a sense of entitlement. That I deserve to be ahead of you on the highway. I deserve, when the light turns green, that you'll go. I deserve your job. I deserve. And I'm not talking about that. I'm not arguing against esteem. I'm not arguing against confidence and skill and excellence. But I'm not talking about pumping the self first and fundamental. Asylums are also full of people that have a lot of self-esteem. I used to work in the state hospital in St. Cloud, and there were people in there who believed amazing things about themselves that were not true about themselves, but they totally believed it. G.K. Chesterton said this, wrote this. Once I remember walking with a prosperous publisher who made a remark which I had often heard before. It is indeed almost a motto of the modern world. Yet, I had heard it once too often, and I saw suddenly that there was nothing in it. The publisher said of somebody, that man will get on. He believes in himself. And I said to him, should I tell you where the men are who believe most in themselves? Well, I can tell you. I know men who believe in themselves more colossally than Napoleon or Caesar. I can guide you to the thrones of the supermen. Men who really believe in themselves are all in lunatic asylums. Believing in himself is one of the commonest signs of a rotter. It would be much truer to say that a man will certainly fail because he believes in himself. We could dwell here for a long time and link this to Romans 1 about how the wrath of God is poured out on the unrighteousness of those who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And we are truth suppressors as a race, the human race. We suppress the truth. And one of the main truths we suppress about ourselves is we cannot supply our own justification. It comes from outside of us. It's not within us. And we suppress that truth. So I'm not talking about self-esteem mainly here. I'm spending too much time on the introduction. We're not going to get around to the subject. Folly and sin conspire to make us desire to be made much of, thinking that we deserve to be loved. That's what self-esteem is, thinking it deserves to be loved. In fact, if you love me because I deserve it, what you're giving to me isn't love. You're giving me a payment. You owe it to me. This is idolatrous and deadly to think this way. Practicing affirmation is not about self-esteem. It's about esteeming the work of God in the lives of people. Now, here comes some very, very good news now. God is at work in everybody. And I'll maintain He's at work in believers and unbelievers. The image of God is stamped in all of us. The whole human race. Everybody, without exception. And he is so gracious. He makes the sun to rise on the good and on the evil. He sends the rain on the just and on the unjust. And he has stamped his image in all of us. This isn't a talk about God's image in all of us directly, but I'm asserting it and assuming it as we go forward into this discussion. You are not the author of your story. In fact, you're not the main character in your story. Your story is mainly about someone else. Paul Tripp has argued repeatedly over the years that, or asserted, defended, that none of us is living the life that he would have written for himself 10 years ago. Do you agree with that? You wouldn't have written this life for yourself 10 years ago. Or 10 months ago. Or 10 weeks ago. 10 hours ago, maybe. And now that we're here, you're put up with me maybe 10 minutes ago. You've written a different narrative here. And our lives are not mainly about us, they're mainly about the one who made us. The God who created everything does not dwell in tents made with human hands, nor is he served with human hands as though he needs anything. For he gives to all life and breath and everything else. Everything else. All. He's got everybody. And so the one who does the work gets the glory. And he's the one doing the work in every one of the 6 or 7 billion human beings now living, or all the human beings who have ever lived. He's the one doing the work, and he gets the credit for anything good that's happening in any of these lives, including my life and your life. So it's mainly about him, though I'm certainly a main player in my story, but it's not chiefly about me. I live for the credit of someone beyond me, someone outside of me, someone other than me. So now, a key is not the main thing, but it's a very important thing. And I'm assuming that well, this is a kind of a key, I guess. I can't get in this building without this thing, or somebody will come running to chase me down the mall or something. I'm assuming you all have keys. There's some here. Here's a key to my house. Not the main thing about my house. When we bought our house and we had our house inspected, they looked at the foundation and they looked at the roof and they looked at the heating plant and they looked at all kinds of stuff and they had a long checklist that they went to do on their clipboard, and not one of them was the key. And when we closed, we didn't say, now before we close, we want to see the key. Show us the key. We want to look at it, we want to, weigh it, or whatever you might do to inspect the key. And yet, after we bought the house, one night, about midnight, one of our fellow elders dropped me off after a long elder meeting, and think he was out of town somewhere, and we got to the house. He dropped me off. I hopped out of the car and did one of these. I don't have my key to my house. And back then wasn't smart enough to have hidden one anywhere. So here we are at midnight in South Minneapolis, and my elder friend and I are dismantling the window to let ourselves in my house. It's my house. Right up there on the second floor, my bedroom's right up there. My pajamas, my pillow, that's all mine up there, and I can't have it. And down there, that's the kitchen, and there's a bowl of Cheerios, or Wheaties, with raisins in there, and I can't have it. I can't have access to it. Okay, key is not the main thing about my house, but without the key, I can't have everything that's in my house. And what I'm going to talk about here is practicing affirmation is not the main thing about your relationships. But if you lose the key, which it is, practicing affirmation is a key. You can't have the relationships that you want to have, the relationships you're already in. In my 3+ decades of pastoral work and working with marriages, I have yet to see a marriage fail where they use the key regularly. The key gets displaced, gets lost, gets shoved aside, stop using the key, invariably. Your key is your car, not the main thing about your car. The engine, the powertrain, the steering, the brakes, the wheel, that's way more important, way more important. But how many of you have ever locked your key in your car? Or lost your key? It's just a sick feeling. That's your car. You can't have it. So it is with relationships. If we don't do what I'm going to talk about here in just a few minutes, affirmation is not optional. It's not like, well, you can listen to this talk and I'm really not into that sort of thing. You live in it, like it or not. That is, doing it and not doing it both produce an effect. And they don't produce the same effect. So if you develop a lifestyle of affirming others, you're going to get certain outcomes that will come from that you won't get if you don't do the affirming, because God has organized an orderly world, a cause and effect universe, where certain causes bring about certain effects. A fire not stoked goes out, a refrigerator unplugged rots the eggs, a garden not tended produces weeds, not vegetables. Affirmation is the fire-stoking, refrigerator electrifying, garden-tending aspect of relationships, and that's the sense in which I mean it's not optional. You can have a garden without weeding. Just you're going to get a different kind of garden than if you weed. You don't have to plug in your refrigerator. It's still a refrigerator. But you're not going to have the same kind of eggs, etc. So I'm saying this, you must do this. The principles of affirmation apply universally to all relationships, including your relationship with God. God inhabits the praises of his people. To think, I'm going to have a relationship with God, I'm never going to tell him anything good that he does. That's going to be a flat, dusty, cold, distant relationship. But those who are continually telling God how they're amazed at what he's doing, there's an intimacy there that flourishes in that affirmation. It's not optional with God. It's not optional with your spouse, your kids, your parents, your siblings, your co-workers, your underlings. How many of you are supervisors of some employees? Okay? Not optional there. How many of you have a supervisor? Almost all of you. It's not optional there. It's not optional with your dog. It's just universal. The state, then, is failing to grasp the connection between lack of affirmation and one's own reputation with others. It's as though we have, I'm going to back a graphic about this. No, I'm going to back up. It's as though people coming toward me who know me at all have a meter on the dashboard of their life. And when they see me coming, it either tilts one way, like, this will be good. Oh, Sam's here. Great. I'll get energy. Or it'll tilt the other way. Oh, he's here. Is there a back entrance? This is gonna take more time than I want. This is gonna drain me in some way or another. That's what I mean by reputation. We live a certain way in front of other people so that they get an impression of what we're like. And a major fueler of that impression is whether we commend things that are commendable about them and about life in general. Do we see good things that God has put all around us? And God doesn't get the glory from these things if we don't call it out and say that they are good things. So when the Bible says the heavens are declaring the glory of God, if we don't look out that window and say, God did that. Look at those trees out there. God's behind them. Look at those geese down there. God did that. If we don't look at that and point it out, he doesn't get as much glory as when we do. And so it is with the qualities that he's put in the people around us. If we don't say, Coco is very hospitable. She was very welcome to me early. We don't point that out and say, God made her that way. God made her to be a hospitable person. Then he doesn't get as much glory from me as he would if I call it out. And that's what I mean by God-centered. When I acknowledge that God made her that way, and there are dozens and dozens of ways to tell a person that they are imaging forth God, imaging forth Christ. Lots of character qualities that God is building into people, even unbelievers yet. Now they'll take off and they'll accelerate in sanctification if they believe, if they embrace Christ and lean on him consciously. But I get ahead of myself here. So now, there are three parties that I want to point to. The mercy of the Lord, to you, confirming others. So three parties: God, you, and others. Here's a text to try to point this out from Paul's letter to Timothy. The Lord grant mercy to the house of Onesimus, for he often refreshed me, and was not ashamed of my chains. When he was in Rome, he eagerly searched for me and found me. The Lord granted him to find mercy from the Lord on that day, and you know very well what services he rendered at Ephesus. Now I'm going to back up to the previous slide. The mercy of the Lord to you and others. So now look for the three parties that are in here. You see the activity of God in there? The very first line. All it is invoking God to do what God does. Give mercy. Give mercy. The Lord grant mercy. To Onesimus. Onesimus is the one who is refreshing somebody else, namely Paul. So you see the three parties there. If we look a little closer, there's more than three parties. You see anybody else in that text? Those of you that are watching online, you can answer in the quietness of your cubicle. Who else is there? Well, look in the first line. The Lord grant mercy to the house. Not just Onesimus. Everybody who lives with Onesimus. And that's what I want to say about you become an affirming person. It's not just you who wins. Everybody who's around you wins. Don't you want to be that kind of person? I do. I want to be that for the people I live with, I work with, I go to church with. And there's somebody else in this text. That's four. There's a fifth. The people of Ephesus. Yeah. That's the church. When Paul wrote his letters to Timothy, he assumed Timothy would read these letters to the church. In fact, in commenting on the people of Ephesus, let's look for a sixth person that's up there. Sixth part. It's almost a trick question. Look at the reference. Timothy. Why does Paul write this to Timothy? Why didn't he just write to Onesimus? Say, Onesimus, I hope God blesses you for the way you refresh me. He's writing to Timothy. How come? Because he wants Timothy to get in on it. Timothy, this is how it works. And tell the whole church at Ephesus that one person refreshes another, God gives mercy to that person. How many of you need mercy from God? I do. I do. He resists the proud. He gives grace to the humble. And if there's one thing I don't need from God, it's resistance. I need mercy. To make it plain, I've just put some markings here so we can see the work of God is underlined. And the dynamic of Onesimus refreshing Paul is what God is granting mercy in. That's the context in which the mercy is being dispensed. Unless physiologically driven, depression, this may seem like an abrupt segue, but I'm trying to get into that text. Depression is a signal that something in my life has become more important than God. Why am I in a funk? God's promises are still true. They're still sure. There are still pleasures at his right hand forevermore, Psalm 16. He's working all things together for the good of those who love him. Eyes not seen nor ear heard, nor has it entered into the mind of man, that God is prepared for those who love him, etc., etc. Those texts are still true, even if I'm in a funk. Even if I get downsized by General Mills, I get ripped. My wife dies. My kids die. Cancer shows. Promises are still the same. I'll just insert here, this is not a talk about that either, but when those things happen and we're tempted to grit our teeth, clench our teeth at God, and maybe shake our fist at him, maybe walk away, it's just so helpful to me, and I'm offering it to you, to keep in mind, he's not done. He's not done. He's not done. My wife and I have lost 2 children. He's not done. That is not the end of the story. Is it? Now, if his word is true, so I don't have to shake my fist at God. He's still working. He's producing. He wastes nothing. Close that bracket and move on here. Depressed persons need mercy, and I'll illustrate it this way. Refreshing others, including affirmation, introduces the mercy. That's what we just saw in the previous verse. I had a guy contact me. He said, I picked up this book and I read it, and then I realized, you live here in the cities, and so do I. And we get together for breakfast because I want to tell you about my experience with your book. Your book literally saved my life, so I'm interested. So we went and had breakfast, and he was reading the book, and he was suicidal. He was making plans to end his life, and he got to page 54. Now you'll all want to get a copy of the book and see what's on page 54. And he decided instead of killing himself, he'd have breakfast what's on. Who wrote a book. Depressed people need mercy. And one of the ways for depressed people to get that mercy is to affirm others. Depressed people can get off on television thinking about me, poor me. And when you start looking around and start commending others, there's a mercy that comes to you. And one of the expressions of that mercy is it lifts depression. Okay, a couple more assumptions before we get to the subject. And I got to be done here in about 15 minutes or thereabouts. So I'm still in the introductory material. God sovereignly brings about ends through means. Now, people would ask people of my theological stripe, why bother to pray? If God's going to do what God's going to do, why pray? It's because God ordains the end. He also ordains the means by which he's going to bring about those ends. That's why Jesus could say, sometimes you have not because you ask not. So the asking and the getting are all part of the fabric of what God is up to. Or why do you do evangelism? Why do you preach gospel to people? Why do you invite people to trust Jesus? Whoever's going to get to heaven is going to get to heaven. That's up to God. So you're kind of inconsistent in your theology, aren't you? No, because God ordains ends and means. And he's ordained the foolishness of preaching to be a means by which people come to faith. How will they believe unless they hear, he says. Both ends and means. Now, here's the application for this topic today. The people around you, God has in mind for them to be refreshed, to be encouraged, to be heartened, to be built up. What's the means? You are. You are the means. And I'm admitting both ends and means. God is the God of all of them. Next assumption is that believers are dependent upon the Spirit. One of the reasons this is a Christian message and not just secular psycho technique, and we should all commend commendable things. I mean, any unbeliever could say that. One of the reasons this God-centered affirmation is Christian is because you won't want to do it for very long if you don't have the Spirit living in you. If you're not a believer, if you haven't been transformed, if you're not in the process of transformation, you'll peter out. You'll give up. You'll walk away from this. It's hard work. It's other-centered. And we're not that way. We're wired to be self-centered. And you got to get outside of self. You got to be looking. You got to get jazzed about commending other people. You got to find pleasure in pleasing them, building them up with what good is going on in their lives. Next assumption is that love affirms. Yes, that's what this talks about, but it also corrects. I'm admitting that. That sometimes love has to get in each other's face and say, exhort one another while it is yet today so that you don't be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. we do need to say, I think you got an attitude there. You might want to reevaluate your strategy, your behavior pattern, or how you come across to other people, or whatever. Love does that. Love corrects. I mean, you have small children. You love them, you correct them. The Bible says if you don't, you hate them. So, love must correct, but this talk isn't about that. This talk is about the first half of that sentence, that love affirms. Then, everything can't be said in one seminar. And so if we get to the end of this thing in the next few minutes, and there's a whole lot more that could have been said. You didn't mention this, you didn't put in that qualifier, and you didn't nuance it with this thing. I'm admitting that in advance, that won't happen. It could be one reason why, and I'll mention that. Is that okay? That book over there includes what I'm covering in this talk and a lot of other stuff. And they cost me a little over $10 a piece to buy, and you can have one for $10. It's honor system. In other words, nobody will be over there taking your money. You throw money in the box, take a book. I think the book is helpful enough that I want you to have one, even if you don't have $10. So just take the book, okay? Now, if you take one and without paying, and you do have $10, then God is the judge. He'll keep track of it. I'm not going to sweat that. Those of you that are watching online, I guess you can check. You can probably beat my price at Amazon or something. One more assumption. Our behavior does not save us. I'm not saying get good at this so that you'll impress God and then he'll redeem, he'll save, he'll justify you. Our justification is in Christ Jesus. We're saved by faith and not of works. We don't do this so that we can boast. That would be upside down. We make our boast in the work of God in others as we look around and we see what he's doing in those others. The root of every sin is idolatry. That is assigning ultimate value or looking for pleasure in something other than God or not for God's sake. And it's a failure to look to Jesus alone. And idols thwart it bring discouragement, anger, anxiety, and a whole raft of other kinds of emotional responses. When we set our affections on something, if I think the greatest thing that will make me happy is a career at General Mills, then when it doesn't, then I'm going to have upheaval in my emotions. But if I think General Mills is just a tool in the hand of God, and my life is really in God's hands, not in General Mills' hands, then it's more likely that I'm going to take things in stride. So don't make practicing affirmation an idol. That is, when I say that God gives mercy to people who affirm others, beware that you don't start making it an economic system where, well, I've heard of you, so God owes me a blessing. That's an overstriding eschatology, and it expects all the blessings that are promised in the Bible to arrive on your timeline. They don't arrive on your timeline, they arrive on his timeline. Proverbs 11:25, he who refreshes others will himself be refreshed. This is the law of the boomerang, or the law of the harvest in the Bible, that you will reap what you sow. Caution, God, not others, is the ultimate source of the refreshment. So when I refresh others, and God's promised in this text that refreshment will come back to me, it might not come back to me from them. So I say a really nice thing to my wife, and I shouldn't stand there holding her. She says something really nice back to me. I am going to be refreshed, especially if what I said to her really refreshes her, and it's not just something I imagine will refresh her, but it doesn't really refresh her. Like, you don't look as fat this month. I've never said that to my wife. I wouldn't be standing here living and breathing, probably. We need to say things that really refresh others and that are God-centered at the same time. And there's an overlapping Venn diagram of those two things. Just to illustrate the point about don't look for refreshment from those you refresh. Matthew 10. Whoever in the name of a disciple gives to one of these little ones even a cup of cold water to drink, truly I say to you, he shall not lose his reward. Does the reward come from the little ones? No, of course not. It doesn't come from the little ones. It comes from God. And it's okay to think in terms of rewards here. Jesus wants us to think in terms of rewards. He says, when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites who love to pray, standing in the synagogues and the corners of the streets to be seen of men. They have their reward. You pray, and your Father shall the door for your Father in secret. Your Father who sees in secret will reward you when you do wrong. Don't be like the hypocrites who sound a trumpet before them and Don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. Your arms are deep secret. Your Father sees in secret will reward you. Jesus wants us to go for those rewards. When you fast, don't disfigure your faces like hypocrites do. They'll get their reward for being seen of men. You wash your face, anoint your head, that you appear not unto men, but unto God who sees, and God who sees in secret will reward you. Or when Paul writes about love, if I had, some of you could probably quote the first 3 verses of 1 Corinthians 13. If I had all wisdom, and I could solve all mysteries, and I had faith so that I could move mountains, and I gave my body to be burned, and I did not have love, what would it profit me? He's assuming we should want to profit. Jesus is assuming we should seek rewards. But he says, lay not up treasure on earth, where moth and rust corrupt, thieves break and steal. Do lay up treasure in heaven, where moth and rust do not corrupt, thieves don't break and steal. Go for the rewards that are the most rewarding and last the longest. It is in your self-interest to go after such rewards, but it is not selfish. If you pile up rewards by enriching others, that is not selfish. How many of you here have grandchildren? How many of you like to make them happy? Yeah. How many of you, when you make them happy, that makes you happy? That is not selfish. That's not selfish, to want to make other people happy. And to commend other people, that is not selfish, but it's in your self-interest. It's like eating whole grain cereal. It's in your self-interest. You should do it. Now, if you do it in such a way that others lose, that is selfish. But if the building up of others rewards you, that is not selfish. God rewards us, and we refresh others. We've talked about this. I'm going to hurry up here. I should say this, that the refreshment that we offer others should be, in their point of view, real refreshment. I was talking about this to a marriage class, and one guy said, can I make a confession? I said, sure. So he said, one Christmas, for my wife, I gave her a table saw. Yes, that's the right reaction. He didn't give her a table saw. Who did he give a table saw to? Himself. Yes. He wasn't refreshing her with a table saw. No, it doesn't mean, there could be some wives who would be really thrilled for their husbands to get a table saw for Christmas, and that would make her happy. Okay, that's fine. But he had not read her very well on that. He was confessing that about himself. So each of us is to please his neighbor for his good, for his edification, build him up in a godly way that he feels being built up. Do I want to take time here? I'm going to skip this. The great theologian Charles Schultz from St. Paul said, well, what are you doing here, Charlie Brown? And go on home. We don't want you around here. Who asked you to come by in the first place? Nobody. Go on home. And so he shuffles off. Now, I'm just about to the subject with 5 minutes to go. Lucy is puzzled now, confused, bewildered, wondering here. You know what's strange to me about Charlie Brown? I almost never see him mad. And she wonders, how come? Now, many relationships are here, and we wonder why. 85% of North American teenagers go through something sociologists call blackout, meaning they tune out their parents. And they'll take exactly the same advice their parents would give them from a youth pastor, from an athletic coach, from their band director, from an uncle, from some same advice. And the parents, upon hearing their teenager take that advice from someone else, well, that's a good idea. I've been trying to tell you that for a long time. The parents have been tuned out, and this is part of the dynamic that is going on there. So I've reached the subject. Here it is. Affirmation ratio has to do with affirming, and you all know how to do it. It's how you got your job. You knew how to convey to whoever was interviewing you that you could give energy to their team. You're affirming me right now with your eye contact. You were affirming me earlier with handshakes and with cordial conversation. Those of you who have married, I'm assuming in our culture it was not arranged, and that you connected because you knew how to affirm one another. You affirm with touch, and you affirm with books, and you affirm with body language, you affirm with words, and you give somebody the keys to your car, that's very affirming. You give a teenager the keys to your car. That's very affirming. You give the combination to you give somebody your password to your computer. Very affirming. Very risky, but very affirming. He's shaking his head. No. You know how to do it. But what I'm saying is that there's a proportionality to it. And different researchers have tried to map out the proportionality and find out how many affirmations to this other stuff that we'll get to in the next slide is the right measure. And I'm saying that the key is the other person's impression of you. It's not a number. It's not how many affirmations. It's how do they read you. You have to get good at knowing how are you coming across to your wife, to your children, to whoever that you're in relationship with. So what's the other stuff? It's correction. What happens over the course of time with relationships is that affirmations start early. Sales. Are you in sales? Yeah. You want to say really good things about your potential clients early on and make them feel safe in your presence and everything is good. But over time, relationships can run into, well, we have to do the paperwork different. You have to clean your room, or you left the garage door open, or whatever. They're just little things that keep coming up. Just a conveyor belt of things that come up. And corrections drain relationships. Even if they're right on corrections. Even if they're needed corrections, they're draining. Affirmations are uplifting and encouraging. It's like this. Over on the left-hand side, we see insufficient affirmation, and over on the right, we see plenty of healthy affirmation, and the natural winds blow to the left in relationships. Even those of you who have had mountaintop experiences where you're just like, God, this is so good. I think some experiences in life where you have fun with God. What's the deal with God? Life presents those kinds of things in relationships. Happens in marriage, happens in parenting, happens in working. As you know, the wind is constantly blowing this way so that affirmation tends to dry up, evaporate, wither, blow away in relationships. So that we're not having much affirmation, we're having mostly correction. And corrections may accelerate the wind. The relation blows all the faster. The more you nitpick and the more you bark about this and that and find fault. You've had relationships, I'm going to guess, where you couldn't win for losing. You've been in a relationship like that? Felt like you're walking on eggs? You know, somebody? There's just been an accelerating diet of correction and insufficient affirmation in that relationship. Practicing affirmation, therefore, I'm repeating myself, is non-optional. If you don't do anything, it's going to drift. So doing a little bit of affirmation will just hold your boat steady. If you really want to make headway, you've got to turn it up consciously in the area of affirmation. Now, if correction happens too much and not enough affirmation, there are a lot of outcomes. I'm just going to mention three. One of them is that the other people around you will tune out your corrections. They stop hearing your corrections, even if they're right. They just turn down the volume, often unwittingly. Oh, they're just always that way. They're always talking about something. And so pretty soon they don't listen to your corrections. And if the pattern continues, too much correction, not enough affirmation, they will tune out you. They not only aren't interested in your corrections, they're not interested in anything. They wouldn't ask you the time of day. Because if they ask you, what time is that meeting with that guy that's speaking to our group this morning? It's 11 o'clock. Did you get the email? Well, who's speaking? Read the email. Did you get the notice? Chris went to all that pain to send out a notice. You printed it out and put it on your cubicle, whatever. I mean, we have ways of, we don't want to be around people who are constantly bad news. And if the pattern continues, the relationship can actually become oppositional, which means the person is against an idea simply because you're the one who's for it. You're the one putting it forward. And it can be pictured like this. It's late at night, and a husband and wife, one of them says, it's getting late, maybe we should fix a little supper tonight, and the other one says, I'm not tired, I don't know what I feel like. Well, okay, how about we'll go out and we'll grab a bite? Well, we got to start the car, and it's in the snow winter, we got to put our coats on, and my hair is kind of nappy, and we've been, and okay, well, how about we'll call out for something, we'll have something delivered in the house. Well, we've been spending a lot of money, it's the end of the pay cycle, and we might use our job at General Mills, and we better watch our pennies. And you can see how everything that one person is recommending, the other person can find fault with. Where did they learn to find fault? You taught them. Taught them. By critiquing everything that they propose rather than doing enough. Now, some things need to be critiqued. We admitted that earlier. There's a place for correction, for honest, candid feedback. Gotta have it. But it needs to be counterbalanced by an abundance of affirmation where these things will happen. So a couple quick stories in a nutshell. I was talking to crew at Campus Crusade staff. We gathered from about 5 states in Indiana a few years ago, and they asked me to talk about this subject. And I was speaking, and there was a guy sitting down here. They had rows instead of tables, and the guy was sitting over here. We took a break. We came back after the break to talk about a different subject, and he was gone. No big deal. I just noted. And later in the day, at lunch break, he approached me, and he said, "I don't know if you noticed, but I skipped your next session. I wasn't there." I haven't noticed, but no harm, no foul. Well, I just want to tell you what happened. I noticed me in your affirmation talk. I have a 14-year-old son, and we live under the same roof, but I would estimate we haven't talked to each other for about 2 years. Very alienated from each other. Just kind of withdrawn from each other. And he's a good son. But I'm always on his case. You put your bike away, got your homework done, look at your mother that way. I'm just a conveyor belt of bad news in his life. And I decided during the break that I was going to call him and just tell him I'm glad he's my son. That's all. So I called him, and I told him I'm glad that God gave him to me as my son. And he started to talk. And I listened. And he talked for 45 minutes. And I wasn't going to hang up. That's why I didn't come to your session. One phone call, measured against 2 years of silence. I'm telling you, this stuff is powerful. It's a waste to not pick up that key and use it. One more story? You don't need a slide for this. That's my reminder. My notes are up there. When one of our daughters turned 11, it was as though overnight all of the knowledge of the universe was given to her. and in that same instant, all the knowledge in her father was sucked out and transferred to her because she didn't need to listen to her dad about things. And so I'm picking up on this habit. She doesn't listen to her dad. It's a bad place for an 11-year-old to be. 11-year-old daughter who won't listen to her daddy is very vulnerable in this culture. I'd love to talk about that for a few minutes. So I determined, okay, I've apparently not been affirming her. So before God, with God in my witness, I prayed, God, I want to affirm this daughter more than any living person on the face of this planet. Okay, all of her friends, relatives, anybody. And if I have to stay up nights thinking ways to affirm her, I will. So I became a student of my daughter and started to affirm things. And so one day I walked past her room and the door was open and she was in there. Now my two daughters were very different. Her sister was very orderly. Everything was, her shoes are all in pairs, all her clothes are hung up, color-coded hangers, section slacks are purple and blouses pink and I don't know, orderly. All of her stuffed animals are lined up according to height or something. Very orderly. This daughter was not that. And she kind of lived by, call it management by observation. Leave everything where you can see it. You know where it is. So it's all there. But I looked in her room, and she had organized her dresser so that the really tall things were in the back, and then the intermediate things were in the middle, and then shorter things were in the front, which makes total sense, because then you can see it all, and you can reach over the short stuff to get to the tall stuff, changing bubbles or whatever, back in the back row. And if you have it the other way around, then you can't see everything, and you have to reach over the tall stuff and maybe knock it over to get up the short. This makes complete sense. In fact, these days they sell these stair-step organizers for you. So I just said to her, I get it. I see this. Oh, this is good. This is something God might do. I say that. God does everything decently and in order. He's orderly. He's the most orderly being in existence. When you're being orderly, you're imaging forth something about God. So I just come in there, this is a great idea. I like this. And then I just stepped over the rest of the tsunami damage. I left. Because I'm out of balance, I could say, you don't really pick up this stuff. She doesn't need more correction from me at that point, at that moment. A few minutes later, I was walking down the hall, and I looked in the kitchen, and she was in there hugging her mother. And I realized, whoa, I love this. I love that an 11-year-old is hugging her mother. I think it makes the mother feel good. I think it's good for the daughter. Makes this daddy feel good. I think it pleases God. See that? This is what I mean by God-centered affirmation. Put God right in the middle of good things. Because they're from Him. They're through Him and they're to Him also. And then I just went on. But how long does it take to do that little part? 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. And move on. In about 10 days, we had our daughter back. And she listened to her dad. And she has ever since. She's now married and has 4 kids. And she calls me for advice about little stuff. And I said to her, you don't have to call me about this. You're going to be married and you can do whatever you want. If you want my opinion, here it is. You do whatever you want. I'm just saying that affirmation, let's get that, gains you a hearing, and that's what you want. You have important things to say to the people around you, they're more likely to hear you if you affirm them. I'll end with this. People are influenced by those who praise them. Even God is influenced by those who praise Him. This is not flattery, it's not manipulative. It's just the way things work. People want to be commended for the good things they've done. Should I take a question?
Prayer and stick around.
Okay, I'll pray and stick around. Lord, I ask now that you would rescue me from being a hypocrite by talking about this affirmation and then not doing it to my wife, my children, my grandchildren, co-workers, people in my church, Chris here who invited me to be here today, and those who have come to this meeting and taken a risk on an unknown commodity like me. Help me to be affirming of them because you are at work and you deserve the credit for all the good that you're doing all around us. So be praised as we become more affirming in the strength that you supply by your Holy Spirit who dwells in us. In Jesus' name.